Welcome to Writing Ratface, a point-blank limited series on the process of writing a 50,000-word first draft. This is your host, Justin Bendell, and this is episode 2. Hey everybody, Justin here. In week 2 of Writing Ratface, the writing continues to be smooth sailing. I believe the reason for this is that I am still writing off of what I know about this story. As you may recall, I wrote a lot about this story in 2020 during the pandemic. I brought the story back up in 2021 and revisited it to develop it into a series of stories or maybe a novel, but it never really took hold. I got distracted by work and life and other things. But ultimately, my time with the story was fruitful enough back then as a kind of existential catharsis in the midst of the pandemic that I sought a moment to return to it. And finally, I've done so for multiple reasons. And I've decided to turn this process of revisiting and writing Ratface into a podcast where I share my writing process, which is very much my own process. It's not a prescriptive process. It's not something that if you do it the Justin way, you'll have success. I have not published a novel yet, so it isn't like I'm some kind of rock star. I'm just somebody who teaches writing at the college level. I'm somebody who has published short stories, and this is me as somebody who's tried to get to the end of a novel, and I'm not quite there yet. Will Ratface be it? We'll see. The thing about this revisit is that I'm not using any old material. I might read it, I might review it, but I'm not counting that toward my goal of 50,000 words. I have an idea about what I want the setting to look like. I've already written a lot of the setting, so in a sense I'm rewriting images that are in my head. I have an image of the titular character Ratface wandering this blighted city in the post-apocalypse. What is he doing? Where is this city? What the hell happened? These are the questions I seek to answer, and I like to do that through image. We get insights into what has happened and where we're going by strong images, which is, common in poetics. I'm also expounding upon images in my head, images that, like a comic book or a graphic novel, were captured in time, sort of sealed in amber and locked in place. These are singular images or photographs in my head, and I'm going, okay, I see Ratface on the top of this broken down building looking out on the traffic. What is this image? How do I expand it? What do I attach this image to? How do I connect the threads that are in my head photographically? I'm trying to expand upon these photos to build a world that interconnects, because I'm writing about a city of 73 million people in a post-war environment. That's a fuckload of city to write about. I'm not going to be able to capture it fully. Maybe if I write about Ratface for the next 50 years. But for the sake of my story, how do I tell a small story, a small, beautiful, intimate story in the context of something so massive as 73 million people in a megalopolis? How do I show the size, the girth, the magnitude of a city like that while also showing the smallness and beauty of a singular story? This is an apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic novel. These are the remnants, the people who live in the city, those who are still around post-war, those who never left, those who stayed home while others went off to fight and die. People are in this massive city, which is a stand-in for a real city, which I'm not going to reveal quite yet, but I will eventually. Or maybe you can guess. But I want to capture the kind of psychological profile of the city. Who's here? Who are these people? What is their thought process? They all must have post-traumatic stress, right? How does that manifest? These things will be examined page to page as I build the story. The writing is rooted in an initial impression of what the city might be. I think of this city as a character. I have to. If I don't love this city, if I don't love intimately what this city can do for my story, then I'm using it as a cardboard cutout prop, and it's not going to have the power and satisfaction that it could have if I really try to fuse it into the story and make it something significant that Ratface has to grapple with or come to understand. How does the city affect the plot? How does the city affect the emotional terrain of the story? When I started writing, I did not have all of these ideas because I was just writing. Ratface stands on a building, he steals ice cream from a kid, he talks like a badass, he's kind of an idiot, he gets in fights. But I didn't know what I was doing, I was just playing. And now I'm playing, but I'm also trying to play in a more constructive manner. I'm playing games that have rules rather than just Calvin ball, or just chaos, you know? I did not know who Ratface was, what his function was. I was just writing about a person who was able to be in the world. I wasn't able to be out. It was the pandemic. I was confined to my house, to my neighborhood. During the pandemic, like many of us, these limitations were chosen. We chose to limit ourselves because we did not want to spread a contagion, get sick, hurt our communities and all that. Meanwhile, Ratface is wandering around this city doing whatever he fucking wants, and it felt fun. It was liberating to write the story of somebody who could be free. Even if ultimately the city itself is a prison, kind of a microcosm of the global pandemic, because it is a post-apocalyptic landscape where Ratface lives, and the city is one of the few clusters of population that survive. But Ratface is locked down nonetheless because of the fallout from war, like I said. This fallout from the war is its own kind of pandemic type situation. I didn't know that during the first round of writing, but I know that now, that this was actually a microcosm of the pandemic, that the fallout from the war narrows the options and sort of increases the tension in the story, because if you're in the city's all you got. You can't go out into the hinterlands and get away. Outside of the city is blighted, nuclear, radiated wasteland, or something like that. I'm not sure what it is, but it's called the wilderness, and it's not an easy place to be. So we're going to explore that in this story, but for the sake of what we know, there's a bit of a container here. The container is the city, and everything happens within the city for the most part. So in short, TLDR, Ratface had mobility, and I didn't. That's how we got to know each other. In week 2, the pieces I am writing about are still set pieces from my original idea. I'm not quite into the new territory. That being said, though, this is not entirely accurate because I've had so much time to think about the story over the past couple years. There are so many layers of thoughts on drafting of what the story might be that some of that I already have in my head. I've been thinking about it, and now I just write it out as if it's a new idea or an old idea, but it's really sort of a hybrid. At first I thought this was just going to be a fun thing to post on Facebook. Then I thought maybe it could be a short story. I might publish a few flash fiction pieces from it. Then I thought, well, maybe it's actually a novel, one worth investing energy in a longer draft. Then I thought, well, maybe not a novel. How about a novella? This might be too light for a novel. I might not have enough to say. But then finally I went back to short stories. Before at the last second I turned and said, fuck it, let's just go with a novel. Throw everything I can at a novel draft and see what happens. If it ends up being stories, that's fine. If it ends up being a novella or a series of poems, that's fine too. The more I write, the more it's going to manifest its true form as a piece of writing. And I don't mean that in some kind of highbrow sense or like the muse speaks to me in code or whatever. I mean that if I throw a bunch of paint at a wall or at a canvas and start moving that paint around with a brush, the paint's going to either reveal its form to me in some way and inspire me to move more paint, or it's going to be nothing. It's going to feel nothing. It's going to be lifeless. And I'll call it a failed piece and walk away. But if I just stand there staring at the canvas and saying, this will be art, but don't do anything about it, it's not going to be shit. True art for me isn't about staring at something until art happens. This is an anti-labor myth of what art looks like. Oftentimes this myth or misperception or mistreatment, frankly, of artists is a real problem. The artistic process is complicated, it's demanding, it requires a lot of work, and it's achieved through labor. And labor is the doing of the art. You have to do, and most of this doing is invisible to the consumer of art. Those who purchase art or enjoy art don't always understand how much goes into the creation of the art. It's not the lone genius manifesting beauty with the wave of a wand. It's somebody suffering, struggling, full of doubt, who cracks the code through labor. And you don't necessarily need to know where you're going when you're making art, and that's why I write the way I write. You are simply going, and you let the art either speak to you or not, and that's how art happens. There's so much effort and intensity and risk that goes into it, and that's why artists and allies of art stand together to remind people that art labor is real. We know that the work that goes into becoming a gifted athlete, for example, is tremendous. How much work goes into how many weeks, how many months, years, decades of practice, of effort, of struggle to get to the point where you can have the skills necessary not to be transcendent in a sport, but just confident on a professional level. Oftentimes, the lucrative sports, football, baseball, and basketball, and particularly when it comes to men in these sports, they get paid. They get paid very well. They get paid atrociously well, given the way that our class society functions. But the fact is their difficult road is acknowledged and rewarded. All difficult roads should be acknowledged and rewarded. All roads that take labor and that contribute to the good of society in some way. In art, the process is not acknowledged, due in part to a misunderstanding of art and labor. All this to say, in week 2, I do a lot of writing rooted in ideas I've already had, feelings I've already had, images I've already had about the character. These images, these ideas have been sitting with me for 3 years. I've written about them before. I'm now trying again. I'll probably do it again and again and again until I have a finished product. And if the finished product, a 175-page book, isn't well received, well, that's fine. You can say you don't like the book, but you can't say I didn't put any effort into it. And that's the distinction that needs to be understood when it comes to thinking about art. Okay, off my high horse. I get Ratface in this story. I get him moving. I get him moving around the city. Unlike the first round of writing in 2020, I have ideas about what I want the city to be and what I want Ratface to be doing. I have a plot point that I'm working on that happens maybe at the 1/3 or 1/4 mark of the story, so I've jumped to that. I don't write chronologically. I don't start at page 1 and work my way up to page 50. I start at page 1, jump to page 20, back to page 5, jump to page 30, then I take a break at the end of the week. This is how I write. I'm writing day to day, but I'm jumping around, filling in the story like a jigsaw puzzle, little pieces of images here and there, as I'm inspired. If I'm writing about Ratface eating blue beans at a corner store and talking to a guy in a trench coat, I go, okay, I wonder how this ties into the scene that I've been thinking about writing in 30 pages. Well, let me jump to that scene and let me start fleshing out that scene and see if I can't incorporate this trench coat guy in that scene as well, so I can have that connective thread to refer back to later when I'm redrafting. That's one example of how that might play out over the course of a writing week. It wouldn't be clear to you because you don't know where the threads are or why, but it's clear to me because I have a sense, I have a loose map of what order things should be in, so I can see where things are, where things might be going, and why. Now, I still don't know anything about this novel overall, other than, these images in my head and a thematic terrain. I still don't know anything about this novel, but if I have a clear sense of the beats in terms of plotting, if I care enough about character development to focus on it, if I care enough about the city to build a compelling world and connect it to the character and the plot so that the reader has a clear sense of things and why they matter, then I'm in a good position to build a payoff in the second 100 pages, the second half of the book. In the meantime, let me talk a little bit more about some of my first writing for this round of Ratface. I started writing on September 4th, and as I've mentioned, I'm going to write consistently through September and October and into November until I hit 50,000 words. This is roughly, 15,000 to 20,000 words a month. So here's the first stuff I wrote about Ratface in this draft process. And a lot of this is more exposition and explanation, almost like a note to myself as a writer, but it might be cut and pasted and reworded and added as exposition in the story. We'll see. I'll read a snippet of this, and then I'll read a snippet of dialogue that I started, so you get a sense of where I'm thinking and how the writing feels. And you'll be able to distinguish the way that I'm writing now from the way that I wrote in 2020. I shared with you in the last episode some of that almost 30s era hard-boiled, slangy language from 2020. Okay, here's the first thing I wrote this time around. In the world of Ratface, skyscrapers are abandoned by capital and occupied by the poorest of the poor. Windows are broken and structures teeter. The wealthiest occupy the sub-towers beneath the lake. There are palm trees and tropical flourishes as the wealthy congregate in mass below the surface of the lake in lofts protected by private security from the ravages of climate change as the destitute collapse into noxious heaps or die by the hands of organ marauders or blood farmers. We are the fodder of pathogens and madmen. We succumb to the violence of a world absent moral order. The law is the law of the street, and the law of the street dictates that, to survive, one must never close your eyes. The city, population 73 million, says the official count. But like anything official, the best they can do is guess and stand by their lies. They claim the murder rate is decreasing, but tell that to Squammy and Max and Sell It. Tell that to Telemark and the Treasure Map Gang. Tell that to Prime Walk and Cleo and the Bellamy brothers. Tell that to Mina and Select. They're all dead, their blood smeared on the brittle, ever-changing maps of this city, hamstrung by heedless growth and a layer cake of lies. Ratface kneels in disgust at the mutilated body of his best friend. This is why you don't make friends. This is why you hide. Now let me read what I wrote the next day, where I realized I get out of this exposition mind and start telling a story of people in action, people communicating with one another. I wasn't even sure who was talking, but I knew I had to write. I wanted to write dialogue. I wanted to get Ratface moving. I wanted to have him interact with somebody, because in that interaction, in that tension between the two, because you don't have dialogue unless there's tension. There's conflict in the dialogue. If it's just dialogue without a goal, without meaning other than casual conversation, if it doesn't build character, then it shouldn't be in the story. So here's some tense dialogue, and we'll see what it means. You find him and your debt will be forgiven. I don't believe you, he said. We'll notarize it. Notarize freedom, Ratface thinks. Why do you need me to do it? He says. Are you seriously asking? Yeah. Because you know where he is. I do? Yeah. And you don't? Lex is an eel, and he knows the city well. If he does not want to be found, we will not find him. Not without great frustration. You, for us, will minimize this frustration. So I'm worth a lot to you. Her voice sours. You are worth the weight of your debt, nothing more. What if I refuse the offer? You know the answer to that. May I ask what Lex did to deserve a death sentence? Yes, you may. What did he do? He made a mistake. Ratface says, So, mistakes are now punishable by death. I thought you guys were the new way. What makes you different from the hate squads? Lex made a big mistake. A massive mistake. But you won't tell me what it is? You have what you need to know, and you have heard our conditions. Do you accept the offer? Ratface lingers in the chair, nodding his head in thought, but not really thinking about anything. There's nothing to think about. Yes, he says. I have no choice. One last thing this week. Here's another thing about process. There's no fucking rhyme or reason to this. I'm not one of those writers who writes every day at 6:45 a.m. Before his bowl of cornflakes or whatever. I write when I can, and I write when I can trick myself into writing. So sometimes that's in the middle of the night, sometimes that's other times. But one night, I explore Ratface's interior. I go, okay, I know this guy on the outside. I know his persona. I know what he likes to project because of his insecurities or his fears. I'm not sure what to do with the story at one point, so I ask myself, what do I really know about the character? Have I talked with him? Have I asked him to explore his own motivation? So in this writing session, I write about Ratface in the first person. I embody him fully, rather than in the third person. My first line, I am Ratface. I let Ratface tell his own story. What is he afraid of? What does he desire? What he says to me reveals things that I have not yet articulated. I nod. Okay. He's a vulnerable guy. He's got a lot of fears. He's afraid of failing. He also has regrets. These are things I can play up in the story. These are things I can use. I didn't know them before because I hadn't heard them. I hadn't thought about them. I hadn't realized them fully. Once I interrogate Ratface, I return to the story. I get him interacting with the city. I have him sit down and talk to a cook about blue sauce and one of his favorite recipes, Tuesday blue beans. Across the counter is a man with a floppy hat, staring at Ratface. When you don't know what to do, put another character in the scene and have them interact with the main character. Stories thrive on conflict and tension. Not fistfights, but tension. What goes on here? What does this man want? Maybe nothing? More importantly, what does this man do to Ratface? What does he make Ratface feel or think? Interrogate this. Play it out. String him along and see what happens. Soon they're walking the street together because the man has something important to tell Ratface. What will it be? All right. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Point Blank. If you don't have questions, look forward, I hope, to next week, episode 3. We start to really get into it. We get to the, quarter point of the story, and I have to start figuring out what the hell I'm doing, right? So that's for next week. I look forward to it, and take care.